You probably think you know how Adolf Hitler's story ended. The evil dictator, cornered in his bunker, takes his own life as Berlin falls. Case closed, right? But what you don't know is how utterly surreal, tragically human, and chaotically desperate those final hours actually were. What you don't know is that we have the voices of the people who were there. The valet who found the body, the telephone operator who heard the gunshot, the chauffeur who tried to burn the corpse with gasoline and failed. These aren't just historical footnotes. These are first-hand accounts of one of history's most significant moments, and they paint a picture far more complex and disturbing than any textbook could capture. By early 1945, the Third Reich was bleeding out. Soviet artillery thundered constantly in the distance, growing closer each day as the Red Army tightened its grip around Berlin. The city that once hosted grand Nazi rallies was now a maze of rubble and smoke, filled with desperate civilians and retreating German forces. Deep beneath the Reich Chancellery, in a concrete bunker designed to be impregnable, Adolf Hitler was discovering that even 40 feet of reinforced concrete couldn't protect him from the collapse of everything he'd built. The atmosphere inside the Führer bunker was suffocating in more ways than one. The air was stale and thick, recycled through ventilation systems that barely worked. Every few minutes, the bunker would shake from Soviet shells exploding above. Rokas Mish, the 32-year-old telephone operator who spent those final weeks inside, later described it perfectly. The constant banging of shells and muffled noises outside made it seem like the end of the world. We knew the time was near. Voices were low but desperate in those final hours. Picture this scene. The man who once commanded millions of soldiers across Europe was now pacing the cramped corridors of his underground prison, his closest commanders either dead, captured, or fleeing. Hitler's paranoia, always present, had reached new heights. He issued increasingly impossible orders to phantom armies that no longer existed, ranting about miracle weapons that would never come, demanding last stands from generals who had already abandoned their posts. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. On April the 28th, Hitler received news that would shatter whatever delusions of victory remained. Benito Mussolini, his fellow fascist dictator and supposed ally, had been captured by Italian partisans, executed, and hung upside down in a public square. The images of Mussolini's corpse being spat on and mutilated by crowds sent Hitler into a spiral of despair. He knew his fate would be identical, or worse. In response to this news, Hitler made a decision that reveals the strange duality of his final days. On April 29th, in a brief, subdued ceremony inside the bunker, he married Eva Braun, the woman who had been his companion for over a decade but had lived mostly in his shadow. Think about the surreal nature of this moment. Wedding vows exchanged 40 feet underground, with the Red Army literally overhead, while the groom planned their joint suicide for the following day. Traudl Junge, Hitler's secretary who witnessed these final hours, captured the eerie calm that preceded the end. He dictated his last political testament matter-of-factly. His voice was steady, but his face drawn, as if the man inside was already gone. Even in his final political statement, Hitler refused to take responsibility for the war's devastation, instead blaming others for Germany's defeat. April 30th, 1945. The morning brought heavier shelling than usual. Soviet forces were now just blocks away from the Reich Chancellery. Inside the bunker, Hitler went through his normal routine, or what passed for normal in those circumstances. His valet, 41-year-old Heinz Linger, helped him dress and served what would be his final meal. The banality of these moments, straightening a tie, eating breakfast, stands in stark contrast to what everyone knew was coming. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, Hitler and Eva retreated to his private study. What happened next was witnessed only by them, but the sounds carried through the bunker's thin walls. Otto Günscher, Hitler's 32-year-old SS adjutant, was stationed outside. He heard the gunshot, a single, sharp crack that cut through the constant rumble of artillery above. Here's where the eyewitness accounts become crucial because they reveal just how unreal this moment felt, even to those experiencing it. Günscher later testified, "I was ordered by Hitler to take care of the bodies immediately after the suicide. I saw the top of his head, unmistakable, as the blanket did not entirely cover him. This wasn't some grand, orchestrated finale. This was a man who had wrapped himself in a blanket and shot himself in the temple, while his wife of one day took cyanide beside him." But the story doesn't end with the gunshot. In fact, what happened next might be even more telling about the complete breakdown of Nazi order and ceremony. Hitler had left specific instructions that his body be burned. He was terrified of ending up like Mussolini, displayed as a trophy. What followed was a scene so absurd, it reads like dark comedy. Linger and Günscher wrapped the bodies and carried them up through the bunker's emergency exit into the Chancellor's garden. Berlin was burning around them. Shells were exploding nearby, and they were trying to conduct a funeral pyre for the man who had promised a 1,000-year Reich. Erich Kempka, Hitler's chauffeur, had been ordered to provide gasoline for the burning. But here's the thing. Even this final ritual went wrong. Kempka later recalled the surreal failure of their first attempts. The gasoline wouldn't ignite properly. The bodies wouldn't burn completely. In desperation, Martin Bormann, one of Hitler's closest advisors, began lighting papers and throwing them onto the gasoline to get the fire started. Picture this: the most powerful men in what remained of Nazi Germany, standing in a bombed-out garden, frantically trying to light a funeral pyre with burning documents while Soviet artillery shells whistled overhead. And even as the bodies finally began to burn, the remaining bunker staff stood at attention and gave the Nazi salute to the flames. Think about the psychological state required for this moment. Their world was literally collapsing around them. Their Führer was dead by his own hand, and they were still performing the rituals of a regime that had ceased to exist. The news of Hitler's death spread through the bunker within hours, but the reaction wasn't what you might expect. There was no celebration, no sense of relief, just a strange, hollow, quiet. Many of the people in that bunker had spent years believing in Hitler's vision, following his orders, building their identities around his leadership. His death left them in a kind of psychological free-fall. Some, like Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda, chose to follow Hitler's example. The next day, they killed their 6 children, and then themselves. Others fled or surrendered. The bunker that had been the nerve center of Nazi power became a tomb, then a curiosity, then eventually just another piece of rubble in Berlin's ruins. But here's where history gets even stranger. Despite overwhelming eyewitness testimony from multiple sources, people who had no reason to lie and every reason to tell the truth, Soviet officials initially denied finding Hitler's body. Stalin himself seemed to encourage rumors that Hitler had escaped, possibly to Argentina or somewhere else in South America. This wasn't because they had evidence Hitler survived. It was because Stalin found the uncertainty useful. A dead Hitler was a martyr. A Hitler who might be hiding somewhere was a continuing threat that justified continued vigilance. These rumors persisted for decades, spawning countless conspiracy theories and Hollywood movies. But historians like Hugh Trevor Roper, who interviewed the bunker survivors extensively, were clear about what had happened. Trevor Roper wrote in 1947, "We must rely on the detailed testimonies of those who were in the Führer bunker to dispel rumors. The evidence is conclusive. Hitler died by his own hand in Berlin. The irony is profound when you think about it. Hitler, who had built his entire political career on grand gestures, massive rallies, and theatrical displays of power, died in the most mundane way possible, a frightened man in an underground room, choosing death over accountability. The regime that had promised to reshape the world ended not with a climactic battle or dramatic last stand, but with the smell of gasoline and the sound of desperate men trying to light a fire in a ruined garden. What makes this story ultimately so compelling isn't just the historical significance, though the death of Hitler certainly marked the end of Nazi Germany and accelerated the war's conclusion. It's the human element. Every person in that bunker, from Hitler himself to the young telephone operator, was facing the complete collapse of everything they thought they knew about their world. Some maintained their loyalty to the end. Others began questioning everything they'd believed, and still others simply tried to survive. The testimonies of these witnesses remind us that even the most momentous historical events are experienced by individual human beings. People